Come on, dance with me. Yeah, we're live. I'm going to turn my fan on. Back here. So hopefully you don't make a lot of noise on the mic. Busting a mic. So we are live tonight. We're going to talk about the video that I just put up today. That is fuel cooling. So as you can see from the video, if you have not taken a look at it, spoiler alert. What I did was took the 5-liter Ford that I've been running a bunch of testing on. In this test, it was fuel injected. I've also run it carbureted, but we ran it fuel injected. So we ran it with the GT40 intake, although for this test, the intake manifold is kind of irrelevant. We ran the GT40 intake and 65 millimeter throttle body. It has blueprint heads on it and a little E-cam in it and stuff. So it's a good little kind of typical of street 5-liter stuff. But what I did was I wanted to test and see what happens if you cool the fuel. Now we know from past testing, and that there's been a lot, obviously, for over the last 30 years or so. We know that when we run a carburetor, we get charge cooling, and that adds power, the charge cooling part of it. We know the same thing happens if we move injectors to a different location on an intake manifold and put them farther away. We know that we get charge cooling that helps power. We know with the E85, we get more power than we do with gasoline. But mostly on the E85 thing, at least the testing that I've done, mostly on boosted applications. Also, I've seen it on some chassis dyno stuff because I haven't done a lot of testing on the engine dyno on these particular combinations. I have run an LT-based L83, the direct injected motor, although I don't remember trying E85 on it. I would like to, but even that one, I don't know if that's high enough compression to take advantage of it. Maybe it is. And when they're in the car, they like to, especially in the case of the Coyote, they like to run them kind of right on the edge, using the knock sensor to take things away as necessary, but otherwise right on the edge. So when you add E85, they're able to add more timing and stuff. But according to Brule, they did a test at West Tech with one of these Coyotes, and even without changing timing on that motor, naturally aspirated, when they added E85, it made more power. So he's a guy that I would believe if he told me that. He does lots of testing. He's there every day. So I just haven't seen it on the naturally aspirated combinations that I've run. When we run E85 on a junkyard LSs or small blocks or Fords or whatever they are, on the naturally aspirated deals, it just doesn't seem to gain a lot of power. One of the reasons for that is that we're able to, when we're running it on the engine dyno, it's running cold. We're able to put all the timing in it that the combination can use. So we're not benefiting from the potential additional tuning aspect of being able to put E85 in and then being able to run more timing in it, which the thing wants, which the chamber style wants, that the E85 allows us to do. But on boosted applications, all we have to do is change the fuel. The air fuel mixture has to be right. But if we just change the fuel and don't change the timing, we pick up power on E85. So I was thinking, with all that, and not to mention the fact that when the Engine Masters guys, Freiberger and Dulcich and Brule, when they are doing their testing on fuel cooling, on the carbureted combinations, they actually saw power. So that made me think, well, look at all what's happening. The fuel on a fuel injected motor is at anywhere from 40 to 50 to 60 to 70, whatever PSI of fuel pressure, whatever you're running. It has a lot of pressure in there. It's got to have a lot of heat. We know from other testing in the cars that the fuel temperature gets really high, in the tank as we're driving around. And so I thought, well, this should be an even better application because we're not looking at 6 or 7 PSI. We're looking at 45, 55, 65, whatever. We're looking at lots of fuel pressure. So this should be even better, right? That was my thinking. So I set up a test where what I did was cool the charge. I put this oil cooler, thanks Mark Sanchez for loaning me the oil coolers when he had it in his shop, and it works out perfect. It already has the lines and fittings and everything on it. It's sized for what we need. It flows more than enough. And not to mention that, it has enough surface area that when we submerge it in a 5-gallon bucket full of mostly ice, but ice water, so that we can, I like that it can get into where, all the nooks and crannies of an oil cooler. So we get maximum surface area contact with a cold transfer medium. So it works really well. And I wasn't trying to get it down to 0 degrees because what I wanted to see is if this was a preliminary test. It was an easy setup. This cooler was fine. I had a fitting that was already drilled and tapped for our type K thermocouple, so I could probe it, find out what the temperature is the way that we normally run it. Because honestly, I've never checked that temperature. We may have put a gun and aimed it in the fuel tank that's outside the dyno cell, but I've never measured the temperature of fuel while we've been running stuff on the dyno. So it was interesting. At it was 92 or 93 degrees. 91 or right around 92 degrees, which was kind of like ambient temperature for that day because it was hot down there. That's not unusual that it would be that kind of temperature. So I was measuring the temperature, and I was measuring the temperature before it goes into the fuel rail. And then what I did was put this intercooler or this cooler in line and then submerge the cooler. And I made sure before we ran to make sure to get all the fuel up out of the line before we, so it was cold. And you could tell that it was cold because if you walk into the dyno cell and after you'd run it a couple of times, you could feel the fuel rail, and it's definitely cold. So there's definitely cold fuel going into that fuel rail and going into the injectors. So, and if you take a look at the results of that test, we'll see I was able to lower the temperature a significant amount. We went from 92 degrees down to 44 or something. So we could have got it colder, but I don't think another 5 or 10 degrees or whatever, or even 20 degrees is what would make or break whether or not this was going to happen, because that was enough of a change in fuel temperature that if we were going to see something, we would have saw something. Now, I'm not opposed to seeing a bigger spread between those, like if we heat the fuel up, because I know certainly that the fuel temperature in a fuel tank can easily exceed 100 degrees. In fact, I think it could probably get to 130 or 140, maybe 150 degrees. I think it can get pretty hot. And so it might be that we, submerge it in a bucket of hot water and test it like that, and then test it in something that's maybe even colder. We could run, a couple of guys suggested running CO2 or nitrous or something across that cooler while we're doing it. We could do that during a test. We could use salt water. There are lots of things that we could do to get a different temperature. I could blast it with a CO2 fire extinguisher. There's lots of things that we could do to get the temperature down and see a bigger change. And that would be interesting. That would be one thing that I would like to try. I'd like to try it on a different application, maybe a different naturally aspirated application that maybe could take more advantage of that. The other thing I would like to try it on, obviously, is a boosted combination, because, like I said, I don't see a lot on the E85 with an NA motor, but I do see it on a boosted one. So maybe at a higher charge temperature, maybe even on a non-intercooled version, we could see if this could happen. The other thing that I'd like to try is, and we've talked about this many times, I've done lots of testing where we've changed the position of the injector relative to the head port. So if you move the injector farther away, there's charge cooling, just like there is with the carburetor, which when Brule and Dulcich and Freiberger did their test, that's where they're introducing the fuel. So it has plenty of time to cool the charge before it goes into the combustion chamber. And so, all that helps. So it'd be interesting to see if that happens. And by the way, it'd just be another cool test to move the injectors anyway, which is another test that I want to do, because I want to show you guys what happens when we do that. And then we could do it with normal fuel temperature, and then with our super cool fuel temperature, and then maybe even super hot. Maybe, we could go all smoky Unic and vapor motor, or the hot vapor motor on it, and see, maybe we'll get better fuel mileage. It would definitely do that. But that would be an interesting test, and just to expand on this, and then see if it happens, see what happens. I'd like to see if we could, and different fuels too. We might also try this like with the E85. Maybe we see it with the E85 going with a bigger temperature swing with this than we do with gasoline. That's why I'm asking you guys, where are all of my super sharp professor like people to tell me what's really going to go on? I get that a lot too. Oh, well, according to the formula, it does this and this and this. I'm like, look, that's why I don't test formulas. I actually test stuff, because that's different than what actually happened when we tested it. Now, we can argue back and forth about why it did what it did, but the what it should do is not the same thing as what it did. So that happens also. So that was kind of a cool test. I also have another one coming up. In fact, I was almost going to combine that with this test, but it turned out that this had more data and explanation in terms of time than this would have just been kind of an afterthought. So I might do a second test on this, where we ran it at part throttle and full throttle. So that's another one that I did on this fuel injected 5 liter. So it's kind of cool stuff because I've got we have map readings and stuff on the various things, and it works out. You know, there's a lot of sharp guys here. It works out kind of like what you would think. But it does pose some interesting questions about what happens when you're out driving around at part throttle, because a lot of us are at very low engine speeds or are at some fairly sizable throttle angles, not full throttle, because I don't ever remember going to full throttle at 2000 RPM or whatever without pulling it down a gear if I was trying to accelerate. But it's interesting the divergence of what full throttle KPA is and part throttle KPA is, and all. More data is always better. So that's why we do this kind of testing. So let's see what you guys have to say about our temperature. It seems to be a popular video. It's doing very well, which I like. I'm surprised, honestly, that the one before this, the big block video, wasn't doing better because blowing big blocks are that's always good stuff. It certainly made a lot more power than this little 302 did, but it shows that we need to test some interesting stuff, and that kind of what people kind of tend to gravitate more toward that. So let's see what you guys got to say. Let's see. Charles Britton, Monster Miata reported 175 during the Silver State race in Nevada. The top was up and the car was borderline airborne, and the driver was Richard Holder. I don't think we ever went 175, but we did go 168 was what I think what the radar was. And the top was rock solid in the Miata. That was awesome. That had our 302 fuel injector. I think it even had a GT40 intake manifold on there. Dallas, dry ice is colder, so there are a lot of ways that we could make the transfer medium colder. That's not. This was like I said, this is more of a preliminary test, so I wanted to see, is this telling me that this is going to do something? And so what I wanted to see was like a little bit of a gain or something, and a big gain would have been awesome. But even a little bit of a gain would have said, okay, look, now we need to do the fuel temperature was the uncooled fuel temperature needs to be 120 or 130 or 140, and then the cool temperature needs to be less than 40 and getting down near zero, however we need to do that. So we see a bigger swing. So then it would tell me, okay, yeah, you need to experiment further in this and go to bigger extremes. But now this is telling me that even if we had it at 92 and I was to lower it down to 20, let's say we could knock another 20 or 25 degrees out of it, which I think is certainly possible given the stuff that we could use to cool it with. I'm not certain that would do anything. I'm not certain finding the ways that are going to cool the mixture or cool the fuel even further. I don't think that's going to do anything. I think we need to do the other things that we're talking about, like moving the injectors, or making the fuel hotter, I think, or doing it on a boosted application, I think is kind of where I'm leaning towards. The 1 liter Mafia, yes. Leland, what about direct injected applications? We talked about that, and I think if there was something that was going to do it, a DI application might do it because it might have higher compression. You can run negative 30-degree fuel. That's good. But I'm saying that if we didn't see anything now, I don't think we all of a sudden get to a point where, like, oh, look, it's super cool, so now it's making power where it wasn't making any other power before. I don't think we get there. I don't think that the fact that I don't think we're in a situation where the fuel isn't cold enough for us to make power. I don't think that's it. The colder fuel should get lower mileage. So too much fuel pump is bad because it will cycle back and make all the fuel warmer in the tank. Well, you're gonna run the fuel back in the tank anyway, because when you're driving under cruise and at idle, the vast majority of the fuel is regardless of what size pump you have. I mean, you could put if you had a small enough pump where you weren't returning fuel, it would mean that you could never go to wide open throttle. So you always have the amount of pump that you need for whatever your maximum power output is under wide open throttle at whatever engine speed that is. Whatever your maximum fuel need is, you have enough pump for that. So while you're driving around, unless your pump is pulse width modulated, your pump is going to be, or your regulator is going to be bypassing all of what's not being used for that maximum wide open throttle power level. It's going to be bypassing that amount always. And if you have a bigger pump, obviously that gets even more so. Cold fuel will be fewer miles per gallon. You want hot air and hot fuel for MPG. The Maribera is still happening. Amanda, so you want a poll for tonight? Okay. Will colder fuel help power on a boosted application? Will colder fuel help power on a boosted application? And our poll is up and running. I have a mid-engine van that will boil fuel in the tank due to bypass. We had that problem with the truck that I was driving. It was a carbureted one, and we did run it through an oil cooler just like this, a small one, and it worked really well. We put the oil cooler up in front of the radiator and ran it through there, and then in the engine compartment, and it helped stop the vapor lock problem that we had. We also used insulation around the fuel line that's in the tank or that's in the engine compartment, because it gets. I mean, if you're lugging a trailer up a hill with a big block truck that's really struggling, it gets really hot. I mean, exhaust manifolds are just glowing red hot, basically. If you do it long enough, they go to white hot, then they go supernova. And so everything around that gets really hot, including the fuel, and then if you can cool that off, then you don't have to worry about vapor lock. We weren't really worried about power. We just wanted to make sure that thing would still ignite and work. Dan, you tried liquid nitrogen cooled fuel. I wouldn't even get the engine to start. Yeah, there would be a temperature thing where that would be a problem. The fuel condenses back to droplets. So I've seen people fix vapor lock on the flathead with a bunch of wood under the carburetor. Yeah, that helps isolate the carburetor. Yep, hot oil and cold coolant. That works best. Elmer, there probably is a spec for different fuels. If you're at a knock threshold because of fuel, I think cooling the fuel would add power. Yeah, if you're at the knock threshold and you change timing to cure that and then added the timing back if the cooler fuel allowed you to do that. I think that that's possible. What about injecting propane instead of converting it to vapor first? Just run coiled fuel line through an ice box. You can, but a coiled fuel line, all of the stuff in the center of the line actually doesn't get very cold. There's just not a lot of surface area there. You have a boundary layer, and then depending on how fast the stuff's flowing through there, you don't get a lot of. I don't think you get as much as we got from this cooler. Does anybody know the expansion rate of propane? I don't off the top of my head. Cool cans work. Obviously, they showed that. 87% with 60 votes in. Will colder fuel help power on a boosted application? 87% are saying yes. They're on the, and 87, as we know, is way over the new 100. JDM, you're talking about a very small amount of fuel per injection cycle, and most of the cooling the fuel does is via phase change, plus the rail is probably right on the valve cover getting hot. The rail isn't hot. The rail is cold to the touch because I actually felt that to make sure that it wasn't getting hot. Nick, I'm looking to make 750 wheel horsepower out of a 5.7 Hemi. Should I just get a new motor or build a 5.7? 750 from a Hemi is really easy, even out of an early one. It's already got really good, it's got decent cylinder heads on it. They're not as good as the later ones, but you don't need that to make 750 horsepower as long as you're doing that with boost. Travis, propane expands at 1.5% per 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Thus, liquid propane has a density of approximately 4.2 pounds per gallon. Nice, see? 504. 60 degrees Fahrenheit, 15.6. I'm not up on the Fahrenheit Celsius conversion. Plastic intake would work better than aluminum when cooling the intake charge because it's high conductivity. We did a lot of testing on composite intake manifolds at West Tech, and there wasn't a lot there. Leary, you want to run a cooler for the return line? You can do that so that it will change the temperature of the fuel in the tank. Aaron, I remember negative 40 degrees morning in Montana. Fuel was cold, but so was everything else. Once I finally got my probe started, the trans fluid was so thick I couldn't drive. Let the clutch out and it would stall. Yeah, the negative 40 degrees cool fuel is not helping you as much as the negative 40 degree air temperature if you can get the trans and everything working. I love the videos of the guys in Russia and stuff going out with a big old branch that they lit on fire and putting it under their trucks or tractors and stuff to get the oil temperature so that it's viscous enough to move around or thin enough to move around. Should I run a 4.9 with a small block Chevy? I don't think you need that unless is your small block 350 making lots and lots and lots of power? The AC stuff has been done a lot. But again, we don't need to get it colder if it doesn't do anything. Yeah, 340 horsepower, you don't need a 9-inch. They're cool and they work, but that 340 horsepower would work with almost any rear end. Freezing power steering fluid. I wonder what is the freezing temperature for power steering fluid? That's going to be like trans fluid, right? So we're at 88 votes, 154 people. You guys, come on, get over there and vote. 158. Come on, we're cranking it up. And make sure to hit the like button and the vote button. Do both of those. I'm not asking a lot. Come on. John, what did you miss? Well, make sure to go vote and make sure to push the like button. The reason to cool the fuel is that the light components of gasoline, which give you the octane, evaporate first. So all the good stuff leaves the party early. Your power steering freezes up in the winter. It might absorb some moisture, making it ice. Yeah, so you're freezing the stuff inside. So come on, camera, get happy again. I know. I moved on you and it threw you off. I know. I don't really know if E85 would benefit more from cooling the fuel. That's one of the things that we talked about, and kind of one of the things I'd like to try. We know that E85 itself is going to do it. Mickey, hi Richard, what engine? It's more fast with the carb cam and springs, L31 Vortec versus an LT1 carb swap. So they're both 350s. So are you asking whether or not an LT1 head is better than a Vortec head? I think that those are comparable. JDM, thank you very much. Where are we at on our vote? 83%. 114 votes in. Come on, guys, get out there and vote. Seems like popular in Australia. No, there's no real winner. Don't think they have to get snow in parts of Australia, right? I have questions unrelated to this topic. You can ask whatever you want. This is open mic night. It is every night. I just have a topic that I discuss at the beginning, but then you get to ask and comment about anything that you want. Look at the blower on top alcohol dragster that will be covered with ice. Yeah, we see that on when we're running E85 through stuff, or if they run methanol. That definitely does it. In 2008, 2009, when Ford was developing a 3.5 EcoBoost, they ran it on liquid natural gas. Had to build a fire under the oil pan of my Mustang in the winter, but I always ran 40 weight oil. You should put some thin stuff in there for the winter. Okay, so if you build an intake tube in and an intake tube, then and ran fins with it, a nitrogen spray or something. So you want to get more surface area? Is that what you're trying to do? Have you ever run twin Holley EFI throttle bodies on a roots blown big block Chevy? I don't think I have, because I don't ever remember doing injectors or an injector plate in anything. Or are you talking about the throttle body with fuel injectors in the throttle bodies? I haven't run those either on a big block. You see featuring some direct injection setup, tuning experiments, injection timing, rate, tons of nerdy math coming anytime in the future. I don't get into the tuning part of it that much, other than to tell you that we gave it the tune that it needed. I don't normally tune the direct injected stuff. I've done a little bit on the L83, but I'm not a tuner, so I'm the wrong guy to do that. I can make the air fuel and timing be what we needed to be, but I'm not an expert tuner, especially when it comes to street tuning and that sort of stuff. And I think Eric did all the tuning when we did the L83. Nick, thanks. I'll probably boost the 5.7 liter. I've always been skeptical on how much power 5.7 Hemis can take. Well, we know that it's like more than 1,100 horsepower, so we've done that. Aaron, when porting somebody else might be able to answer this. I'm not a porting guy either. When porting, where did it go? When porting my 460 head, it seems people cut the thermactor hump off, but leave a vein to the direct exhaust. Is this common, or is it a 460 thing? And if so, does it actually work or leave a restriction? Does anybody have any specific examples or that they've done with 460 heads? Darren, I'm confused on E85. Seems like it causes pinging in valves. Ping in valves. I don't know what that is. People race with it. They do race with it, and it works really well. It's just that it can cause you to have deposits in like carburetors and things, and it can be kind of tough on some of the pumps and the fuel lines and stuff. But it works really well. It's high octane, and it has like a cooling effect, so it makes power. Travis, have you ever run an AC on the dyno to see exactly how much power it takes? Not with the whole AC setup hooked up. But I think I have done it. I did a test for the Honda book where we turned the AC on and off. But now that I think about it, I don't know if it had, because it was a factory ECU. So it probably switched off the AC when we were doing the test anyway. I don't think any of the accessories, I don't think any of them use as much power as the water pump. So you want cooler fuel with a nitrous setup? I don't know that that's necessarily true. The nitrous already is going to cool stuff. Mid-late, catching up, retest, tunnel ram, injectors, and plenum firing at runner openings. More surface area for the spray to be more effective in the intake charge. Napa, you want to run a 1471 on a 632 twin 50 Holley fuel injected throttle bodies. Okay. I think that they will be less problematic on a blower application like that than they are on single plane or dual plane, single throttle body carbureted applications. It's becoming more common to use cars with AC to cool multiple things. You want to check out the micro heat exchangers. Richard, what's the most horsepower you've seen out of a Buick V6 like the Grand National? I haven't ever even tested a Grand National motor. I've only been there on the chassis dyno when people have done that. I've never run one on the engine dyno. I've only run the 3800 Series 2 stuff. I'd like to see fuel cooling on a blow-through carbureted application. Bobby, thank you very much, man. Anything I can do to help? Richard, have you noticed you speed your dynos up to 1.5? They sound like a cup engine. Whoa. Is that from my computer, or is that just from me being that cool, being cup cool? I'd like to see a comparison between L83 and LM7 with ignition timing. Same fuel, of course, and hopefully similar cam profiles. I already have that up. I have a stock L83 and a stock LM7, and the L83 is a lot better. In fact, the L83 is as good as a cammed LM7. As for the question on AC, I think he meant, have you ever used AC to cool a charge on a dyno? I thought that the question on AC was, have you ever tested AC on the dyno to see how much power the AC compressor was worth? But otherwise, no, I haven't tested an AC system to cool the charge air for an intercooler. Dallas, you can put a showing off of this 429 Super Carbureted again. A 429 Super Carbureted intake on a stock 429 or 460 and gain 20 horsepower without port matching. So I take it you've done that test? An Opel GT, I like those. I can't recall if you've tried water injection on an NA motor. I never had a motor that would need that. We have run water meth on a Coyote, on an NA Coyote, and that definitely added power, but we did that on a chassis dyno. Henry, you see older Mercedes cars that have a cooler on the fuel line to chill it from AC compressor. They're probably, yeah, vapor lock is probably why they're doing it. I would highly doubt that they would be doing that for power. I got here late. Would the cooled fuel work better with a stack EFI and injectors further up? That's one of the theories. That's what we were talking about. Wonder if the size of the throttle body changes the intake temp significantly. I doubt that would happen on a boosted combination. Oh, Dallas, that was from a book from the early 70s. I probably have that book up there. See how our poll is doing. Will colder fuel help power on a boosted application? 82% saying yes, and the no's are just sneaking in there a little bit. I've seen 12 horsepower difference on standard accessories unloaded, just the belt driving them versus naked engine like really. So did you take the belt off altogether on a chassis dyno? Because we've done that test before too, where you just remove the belt. But then the problem is the water pump is not spinning, and you're heating the motor up while you're doing that. What's your experience with adding an additional injector in the intake on boost? I've seen that done a lot, and we've done that in the past. The thing that I don't like about it is the same reason that I don't like water meth injection on a lot of stuff, especially things that have intake manifolds that were designed to flow only fuel, like an LS truck manifold or lots of other manifolds, even a tune port manifold, anything that's an EFI manifold like that. The problem is if you inject the fuel in, it doesn't get evenly to all the cylinders. And so if you're asking it to do that, it's more of a suggestion, actually. And so I think that can be problematic. But a lot of the blower kits back in the day, that's what they did. They had additional ejectors, sometimes two of them. I remember the tune port kit from Vortec and Paxton. Probably all those guys did it like that before they got control on, reprogramming the ECU. How about cooled 91 instead of E85? We only did the test on 91 already. With the right setup, you could cool or heat the fuel with AC. That people keep bringing that up. Cooling the fuel on the dyno is not an issue. That's really, really easy, actually. That's not the problem. The problem is that it didn't make any power. What combination of both direct and port injection would be an ideal setup? Benefits from both. I think that what they're trying to do, I thought that they were adding port injection to improve power. As it turned out, that's not the case. GM did it on the LT5 motor on the latest version, the 2019, I think, 19 or 20 ZR1 motor. Or was it later than that? It might have been later than that. But they had both, and the port injection actually is helping get the contamination off of the back of the valves, because that's the problem with port injection is when you get reversion, you get stuff on the back of the valves, and that with port injection, it helps keep the valves clean. I don't think that they were doing it for additional power, especially after seeing the results of the port injection versus the direct injection that Brian did. Ram, 342 horsepower is enough. It's enough for what? What are you trying to do? Cash, thank you very much. Richard, small block Chevy, stroke to 383 would block, world block, AFR head, scat rotating assembly. Would you go ProCharger or turbo? I'd like to be over 800 horsepower. Well, we talked about this a lot. A ProCharger is going to give you, or any centrifugal supercharger is going to give you a linear boost curve. So it'll be low, it'll be 2 or 3 pounds down low, and it'll be whatever you've sized the pulley to produce whatever kind of boost you want to make at whatever your peak engine speed is. A turbo, on the other hand, is going to come up, and let's say that you're running 10 pounds on both of them. The turbo is going to have 10 pounds for a lot more of the curve than the ProCharger will. That being said, a lot of this area down here where the turbo might have more boost is also an area where you might not have traction. That's why a lot of guys on the no prep stuff and the guys that are drag racing use ProChargers. They make lots of power. They have more losses associated with driving the blower. But if they're having to take away a bunch of timing and stuff and eliminate boost, they don't need that extra power anyway. You might find that you like it on the street and having more average boost and more average power production with the turbo, which is what you'd have. And also, the turbo will make more power at whatever boost level you choose. If you run both of them at 10 pounds, the turbo will make more than the blower. But a lot of guys don't want the heat associated with the turbos. They don't want the plumbing. The ProChargers are easy to put on. So there are a lot of things to consider that don't have anything to do with which one of them is better. Richard, do you think you can run more timing with colder fuel? I talked about that on our dyno. I think that there's a situation where that's possible, but I don't think that that situation was possible or necessary on our dyno, because we're already running the motor cold, both in water temperature and in air temperature, and it's already kind of optimized. We've tried more timing before, and it doesn't make any more power. I didn't try it on this one, but I don't think that, like I said, we'd already tried more timing before that. And where we had the timing was where the thing made the most power. JDM, when you say help, you mean prove itself with the repeatable dyno test gain with the same fuel type and say, I don't know. I don't know what my comment was or what your question is. So you have to be more specific about what you're asking, because I don't know. This Ram truck guy needs to put down. Ram trucks are good. Before we entertain cooling the fuel, what do you think about the shortage of blocks? I obviously don't have any effect on that, but it's not good. If there's more people that want them than there are pieces available, obviously that's going to not be good for pricing. I was told a cam from Hughes will be a much better buy than a comp cams for my Dodge van. Okay. I don't know what you mean by much better, but much better for gas mileage. Still thinking about it when I asked you last week. I don't know which cams you're talking about. And obviously I haven't ever tested fuel mileage with either of those cams, so I don't know. Hi, Richard. Just joined. I wasn't trying to be smart about the calculations I posted on your video. I was just trying to help everyone understand the physics behind what was going on. No, that's all good. More data is always better. The problem I have with lots of of engineer types is that they for a lot of times forget the audience that they're talking to. The audience that's here usually on the live feed, at least the guys that are here making comments, we got a lot of sharp guys here, so they can understand that. What a lot of engineers or engineering students or just generally smart guys forget is that a lot of this stuff needs to be translated. And they also forget that calculations don't give us results. They give us theoretical stuff, which is good and it's important, but it's not the same as what actually happens a lot of times. I'd love to see a turbo Buick block on the dyno. Does a 3800 count? If it came out of a Buick, does that count? Yeah, JDM. I didn't know what you were trying to ask there, but I'll help out any way I can. Dustin, combustion requires fuel, heat, warmer, oxygen. The warmer the fuel of any kind, the more readily available to combust. So that's the other theory is should we run hot fuel? Should we do the smoky unic hot vapor kind of thing? Would that be better? I don't think bringing a kitchen stove in there and heating it up with a kitchen stove is the right way to go about it. I'm just scrolling back here. Shouldn't they show up as EGTs as well? That would have been interesting. I didn't run EGTs on this test, but I would like to, because I would like to. The test I'd like to do on EGTs is I'd like to see what an intercooler does to EGTs. $3,800 is a good motor. In fact, it's probably better than the Grand National motor is. I know it's going to hurt Grand National feelings. Can use a large transmission oil cooler as an air-to-water heat exchanger. Yes, that's what we did. I did that with the. I actually had a little oil cooler that I used for the Vortec when I was running the Vortec on my Mustang, and that worked really well. But you can also, and that's exactly what I used as the heat exchanger for the turbo in my little Sprint for the intercooler, the air-to-water intercooler that I replaced the factory air-to-air stuff with, and it did much better. saw you ask about direct injection. I'm studying it myself. I tune N54s, BMWs. Cool. Wrap the fuel around and run the exhaust. That'd be good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run another heat exchanger, and I'm just going to put the heat exchanger behind the exit of the exhaust. That should be fine, right? What would be a good cam to use on an LSA supercharged LY6 engine? The cams I suggest for those kinds of motors are the cams that, even more so with those, I think, than other motors, you need to decide on what you want for drivability. A lot of guys like an LS9 cam or an LSA camshaft, or an LS9 would be an upgrade for that because it would make more power. But they like that camshaft because they're soft and drivable and stuff. Some guys like that. You can put a camshaft in there that makes a lot more power than the factory cam, especially than an LSA cam. That's much weaker than an LS9 camshaft is. But I would put an NA cam in it, is the one that I would use. Cooling fuel is counterproductive to combustion. What could go wrong? I told you about when we had when I did the Wheel of Death show. We put targets back behind the headers, and then we dropped BBs down the carburetor, and we knew that they were some of them at least were going to shoot out. So we wanted to see if we could get, bullseyes with the targets back behind the headers. In retrospect, I should have used much smaller headers for it. It would have been cool. Oh, Kurt, totally. His comment is, I bet you $1 that if you put up a poll that asks, does a top fuel engine make more power than a Briggs & Stratton, somebody would say no. See, now look, we're already down to 78% on the yes, and 22% saying no on the poll, which is the 20 is there's that many people. Honestly, I don't know the answer to that question because I haven't tested it, so it should be interesting. Salvador, so the transmission coolers are low pressure. Are they low pressure compared to I thought that they would be similar to an oil cooler. Stream, what small block made the most torque? Of every small block ever made? And what are you including in the small blocks? Just the Gen 1 stuff, or is it Gen 2? Is it LS? Is it factory supercharged stuff? Would like to do a 289 with twin Corvair turbos off of a Spider with Carter side drafts. I think those would be awful turbos to use, and it'd be interesting that you could even find two of those. But I'm all in if you do it. Dan, what's the best firing order? When you lose octane, heat the fuel, you kill the combo in a heartbeat. So what if we're not at the detonation threshold and then we have extra octane to lose? What about power steering cooler? Jeffrey, all the power steering coolers I've seen are actually not very good. They're just the loop steel line going with fins around it, and that's not very effective. Ecotech versus VTech. I think I'd put my money on a K-Series. run power steering coolers on the low pressure side. I know, but my point still remains. My comment is still accurate, right? That the coolers that they use on them are not very efficient. Caps are okay. We're all good with caps. I guess maybe the poll question should have been, will I gain power if I heat the fuel? Maybe that'll be for tomorrow. So we won't do it as a poll, but let me see in the comments how many people would want to see me do a, and I know I have to do the chili bomb, which I want to do the chili bomb really bad, but how many people would want to see an intercooler on an NA application? I get that question asked all the time. Can we run an intercooler on an NA motor? Because they know most people have grasped the concept that cooler charge air adds power. So they want to cool the air. So they're thinking, okay, cool, intercooler. Okay, I don't need boost. Well, boost would be better, obviously. But on my NA motor, I want to run an intercooler on my NA motor. Is it going to add power? That maybe needs to be a poll question later on. But let me know what you guys think. Should I run a test on an NA motor with an intercooler? How about a test decreasing the cooling water in the engine in 10-degree increments? I can do that test fairly easily. We just have to make sure that the oil temperature stays the same for all of that. Is there a practical lifespan for hypereutectic pistons? Does anybody have any idea on cycle life for that? It would depend an awful lot on what you've subjected them to. Number of heat cycles, and really for a lot of stuff, it's the number of extreme heat cycles that you've done. Have you overheated it? Have you been not nice to it? Have you detonated it? Not so if you already have ram air intake like mine. We've talked about this before, but I've seen them use at Bonneville where they have lots of vehicle speed helping force air past an air to water intercooler that they use with ice water in it. And it's big enough to where it doesn't represent a restriction. And also it has positive pressure on one side of it. So they're getting both positive pressure, at least a little bit, and they're also getting charge cooling, which is good because a lot of times it gets really hot out there. So that's a good benefit. For most stuff that you see on the street, ram air is actually pretty hard to get. Air to water NA cooler. Vehicle, I bought an L67 after watching your series. Any suggestions on where to swap? Already got a Corvette, so trying to avoid a two-seater. There should be lots of things that you could put that in there. I would really like to see Oliver put one in that Nova. That would kind of be cool. But there's lots of good choices for that car too. Cooled fuel test, power gain seem to follow intake manifold, sine wave. I don't think power gains, I mean, there was a sine wave in the power curve, which continued when we ran back-to-back tests. So you're going to run air-to-air intercooler to bring the intake charge temperature down to ambient. No, we have to run air to water. You have to bring it down below ambient would be the only way that it would gain power, obviously. Dan says keep running the high protected pistons till they rattle on a cold morning. Yeah, vehicle for the poll. What about hot or smoky unit hot vapor engines? That's another discussion for another day. I've heard that a lot of the Corvair turbo stuff was actually made by Porsche. I swapped out the mechanical fan for electric one on the 04 Silverado, 6-liter. Do I feel it? Not sure what I can tell. You need to do some really direct back-to-back acceleration tests for that, because most of the time when you're driving around, the fan clutch might not even be working. An NSX. Well, my buddy has an NSX with a K series in it. I mean, with a J series in it. Yeah, mechanical fans, especially direct driven ones, use up a lot of power. A killer chiller on the air-to-water intercooler for NA test motors. Perry, you're thinking hot fuel, the hotter fuel aerosolize quicker in the chamber. Okay. Like your graphs, heating fuel and cooling air will gain, and eventually downturn once optimum balance is reached. Gonna try the single GT45 with nitrous. Nice, that's a good combination. I've seen Boosted Boys K Series NSX. That's what Jimmy was originally talking about, putting that in, but he did a and I think he made the right choice putting the J Series in. The hot vapor engine. Next winter, I'll try to dyno motor pipe second negative 30-degree outside air. That would be good. I tried to talk the guys at Westech, and because since they have 2 dyno cells, but they're pretty far apart, but I wanted to run 2 motors and drive the supercharger off of one motor and then run a big long pipe, 30 or 40 feet, whatever it is, over into the other dyno cell, into the other motor, so that we could have one motor spinning the blower and then run it into the other motor and see how much power it made, and see how much it made with it driving the blower, and then see how much it made with it not driving the blower, and then we could all sit around and argue about that all the time. Wait, didn't you measure intake temps when injecting nitrous? I did nitrous testing on the intercooler, and pretty sure we measured the nitrous doesn't cool the charge air as much as we thought. There's just not enough of it. The J Series NSX is probably a much nicer driving car, probably not as fast. This one's a lot faster. This one made 6 something at the tire so far. So it's going to go higher than that. It's just that the J Series is a lot less expensive than the C Series was. Two more minutes. So I'm going to close out our poll. It keeps going down and down. 79% saying yes, 21% saying no. Will colder fuel help the power on a boosted application? So we will end that poll. So now I want to run hotter fuel. Oh, you can get that stuff up to 300 or 400 degrees. Ajax Have a good night, man. Ram air is just hard to get unless you did it like I did. Australia's in the house. I know. Where's the last 1%? I know. It was during the changeover that we missed part of it. Around primary and secondary electric fans. That's how the factory did a lot of stuff. I remember the secondary fan kicking on the Corvette that I drove, and man, and I can't believe how hot they let those things get. Have you seen compressed air used as a supercharger? Yeah, the compressed air supercharger they ran at West Tech, and it makes really good power because it doesn't have any drive losses, and it's really, really cold. Maui. They're having some big waves over there now. Use a turkey fryer to boil hot water and put the cooler in the hot water. There you go. Chris, we'll see you later. Coffee can under the hood with coiled metal fuel line packed with ice. Inner chiller. Yep, salt in the ice will help. And we can make ice cream. Just got to churn it. Okay, guys. Thank you guys all for showing up. Interesting conversation tonight. That's good stuff. Obviously, I need to do more weird testing like that. I think we need to heat the fuel up next. Obviously, we need to test. I want to show you guys what happens. Not just on that old Honda one that I did, which obviously that gained a lot of power. But we need to move injectors in something else, something maybe LS related or something that makes it easy. I wanted to, in fact, I gave somebody that has a company that specializes in LS stuff, gave them a drawing for the an intermediate piece between the Holley high ram and the Holley lid that put injectors down in there and did that, which is a pretty good idea. Especially if you inject the E85 there, it would be definitely beneficial. But it would be interesting to see what happens. I want to do the change in injector position. I just need to do something like if I'm doing it on the dyno, I don't want to make something that, oh, look, this is the coolest thing ever, and now it needs to go into production, or that it even goes and works on a car. It just needs to work on the dyno because I need to do it fairly quickly so I can get the test done. But as long as it represents what that change in injector position does, it tells us kind of what we want to know. So it would be interesting. I also want to try the hotter fuel and kind of see what happens there. You know, maybe Smokey knew what he's talking about. Maybe the hot vapor stuff is the way to go. Thank you guys all for showing up. I will see you all tomorrow. And boom. And